Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope everyone got a chance to grab some lunch. Thank you for coming today. We are so excited to have all of you here. My name is Virginia K. Solomon, and I am the president and CEO of Common Cause. Thank you. Fresh off of vacation, so there's lots of smiles, I will say. But I want to thank you all for joining us today, and a special thanks to NEA for hosting us. It's always great to have friends and partners in this movement that we are in together who are kind and gracious for opening up the space for us. We're here to discuss the Federal Election Commission at 50. We're going to discuss today the legacy and the future of the federal agency charged with enforcing our campaign finance laws. In the early 1970s, we're going to take a little history lesson. Common Cause actually led the charge to pass sweeping campaign finance reforms, including the creation of the FEC, to curb the outsized influence of big money in politics so that ordinary citizens would have a voice in the decisions being made by our elected officials. But today, the system is broken again, and the FEC and our campaign finance laws are no longer holding back the flood of big, secret, and corporate money. Actually, I think not much money is a secret these days, actually. Pay to play is back in Washington, and it's back in fashion. President Trump rewarded his biggest donors with key positions in his administration. Tech CEOs brought front row seats to the inauguration, as well as many political favors. It only took a look at what was happening on the dais on Inauguration Day to see the signal that was being sent to the American people. Antitrust and other investigations by federal agencies into companies owned by Trump donors have been dropped with little or no explanation. And we're all paying a price since the Supreme Court gutted our campaign finance laws with disastrous rulings like Citizens United. That ruling and others that followed left a system that allowed Elon Musk to spend more than $275 million backing Donald Trump and allied Republicans in 2024. Musk was then given huge powers without Senate confirmation to slash government spending. With those powers, whether the courts stepped in or not, Musk has done lasting damage to American families, farmers, factory workers, schools, hospitals, universities, and so many others. Industries and individual corporations are spending huge amounts of money on in our elections under the new rules, and they are getting what they want in Washington. The crypto industry alone pumped more than $240 million into the 2024 election, and other industries and individuals have opened up their wallets as well, and election spending continues to set new records every single cycle. So basically, there's nobody guarding the henhouse. The FEC doesn't have a quorum right now to enforce the laws the Supreme Court hasn't already struck down. But we need what we need right now really is a new set of sweeping reforms today. We can't wait. Just like we did after Watergate. It's not like this is not heard of. We've had these rules in place before. And the American people are with us. The polling backs up this claim. The vast majority of Americans support fixing our broken campaign finance system and getting big and secret money out of our politics. And we all deserve to know who is buying favors from our elected representatives. And when we pass those reforms, we will need a functional FEC to enforce them. Our panel today is going to discuss the legacy and the future of the FEC as the federal government's campaign finance watchdog. And it's necessary. This wasn't made for no reason. We're seeing what happens without it. But before my colleagues introduce our distinguished panelists, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, my friend, Representative Joe Morelli, the ranking member of the House Committee on House Administration. Now, I'm going to just say something about Congressman Morelli, because not only is he probably one of my favorite Congress people because he is a real guy. And what I mean by that is he doesn't play around with words. He's a straight shooter. But not only that, he's really been a longtime democracy reform leader in the effort to pass legislation to get big and secret money out of politics and other efforts to strengthen our democracy in the face of real and growing threats. He's not a grandstander. He's not somebody who is seeking to be, on television all the time. He's a real, when you say an average Joe Morelli is the average Joe. He's going to roll up his sleeves. He's going to do the work. He's going to get the work done. And that's why he's beloved by so many people. And so, Rep. Morelli, I just want to thank you, welcome you up to the stage, and let you know how much we will look forward to working with you and your office to fight, to pass these reforms in the months and years ahead so that every person will have a voice in Washington. So welcome to the stage.
Well, of course. Thank you so much. I have to repay the kind words that Virginia said. She has been a delight to get to work with and to know, and the work that Common Cause does and she does. And what Lincoln said about the average man is he must have really loved him. He made an awful lot of them. So I take that as a great compliment. But thank you for all the incredible work you do. And we've had the chance to be dinner partners and always enjoy the engagement so much. And thank you to Common Cause. Thank you to the panelists, to Omar, Dan, and my dear friend Tiffany for being here. Thanks to Common Cause. Thanks to NEA for hosting this. I can't imagine a more important time. And thank you for giving me any reason to leave Capitol Hill. Especially right now with it's so hard on some level to be there and to watch the dismantling. And I know that's for another day, but anytime you can be around like-minded people who really care deeply about the future of this country, you're grateful for those moments. So thanks. I'm delighted to be here to talk about Federal Election Commission. And its 50th anniversary. And I should say at the outset, I see my friend Ellen over my shoulder. Most of my remarks will not relate to Ellen or her service. I should just put that as a disclosure and a disclaimer at the outset, nor the great work of the new chair-elect. But it is important to note, it's hard for me to believe even, and I remember the time when we were coming through Watergate, and the Federal Election Commission was created back in April 14th, 50 years ago, this year, 1975, and opened its door as a key component of the reform in the wake of that scandal, which now, I hate to say, in retrospect, the Watergate scandal seems a little quaint, doesn't it? I mean, it's hard to imagine, but in those days, you had members of both houses of the Congress that were prepared to rein in the excesses of the president. So Congress created as an independent agency outside the scope of the White House and its control, something we need to remind the president of repeatedly, and to put an actual cop on the beat as it related to campaign finance law. Unfortunately, reflecting, as we have all been doing, on the FEC's first 50 years, especially in the last 15. And I think while there's been ups and downs, the last 15 years in particular, since the advent of the disastrous ruling for Citizens United, again, thank you, Tiffany, for all the work that you do in the space. The FEC is clearly not fulfilling its mission. Today, the FEC is a story, a tale of deadlocks, moribund investigations, partisan enforcement, and in light of the anniversary, the Committee on House Administration is releasing later this afternoon, and I have a prop. I can show you the advanced copy of the staff report on the history and the story of the Federal Elections Commission, entitled "The Elections Commission at 50: The Deregulators Are Winning." And I do want to give a shout out. I'm not going to go through and name all the staff here, but they did, led by Sean Wright in this space, did such amazing work. And I'm so privileged to get, and I know all of you get to work with them, but I consider it a true privilege to be able to get to work with extraordinary people. So can you give them all a big round of applause? Thank you, sincerely. And I'll certainly, I'm sure this is going to be a bestseller. Millions of copies will be purchased and read through to the end. But I'll just go through some of the highlights of it, because the report illustrates how broken the FEC has become, particularly, and it's floundering. We had some conversations about whether it was foundering or floundering. We settled on floundering. I think it's both. But in the wake, particularly of the Citizens United era, and we need to continue to talk about this. 15 years ago, as you all know, the Supreme Court permitted corporate special interests to spend unlimited, often undisclosed money in American politics. The decision allowed and continues to allow the wealthy and well-connected to drown out the voice of everyday Americans, as Virginia said so well. In recent years, more money has poured into our elections than ever before. Most of it undisclosed, and alarmingly, it's at an accelerating rate. And the disturbing trend, and you see it, and I mean, we certainly saw it in this past election, increases the risk of political corruption, opens the door to interference from foreign actors, something my friends across the aisle insist that they don't want to have happen, but through the lack of enforcement, that's exactly what it does, and is a direct threat to national security. It's hard to even quantify or get your head around what's happening. The 2024 election cycle broke campaign spending records, a staggering amount of money coming from the wealthiest donors. I mean, we all know about Elon Musk. What we know is that he spent at least $288 million. It's really hard to think about. I don't make $288 million in 3 years, and he spent all of that in one election cycle. And that's what we know that's disclosed, right? So we don't know what he's done, and we're going to talk about the amount of money that isn't disclosed, the dark money. It's hard to wrap your head around that much influence, and it's hard to say with a straight face to average Americans that, yes, this is a participatory democracy, your voice counts, and you have as much voice as Elon Musk, despite his $288 million that he has invested in the president's campaign. Who would believe that? Who would? I mean, it's not even, I mean, it would be laughable to say, and yet that's the state we find ourselves in. And that would be the argument, I guess, that my friends on the other side of the aisle would say. And it's important to note, I think we all know this, Elon Musk's personal wealth jumped $200 billion since last election day. So the return on investment, $288 million invested, $200 billion, such a staggering sum of money. I think, honestly, it's truly hard to get your head around. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, $288 million, I couldn't get my head around. And $170 billion of it has come after Election Day. So within that period, $200 billion, $170 billion since the election of Donald Trump. And now it's probably a little smaller because Tesla, I'm hearing, isn't doing quite as well. But, I mean, just think about it. And then to be appointed as not only not confirmed by the Senate, but not agreed to by anybody other than Donald Trump, to go in and literally look at some of the most sensitive information of Americans. And it's no coincidence this week, speaking of Elon Musk, no coincidence that President Trump, as you may know, reached in, fired the Librarian of Congress, which is an extraordinary breach in and of itself. But then the day after, the Registrar of Copyrights issued a report which basically took on Musk's efforts to basically eliminate all intellectual property rights, a report that is at odds with that belief. Donald Trump fires the Registrar of the Copyright Office. So the extraordinary influence, which you see every day, is being played out, but it's not isolated. It would be bad enough if it were isolated. But according to Open Secrets, 6 donors contributed over $100 million each in the 2024 election. The average citizen, you could understand if people say, why am I even bothering to go and vote? This is bought and sold by literally billionaires in American politics. And when that happens, and they use their vast influence, it affects elections like it never has before. So, and I think for Americans, it's hard to see. That's the job that you all do, that I need to do, and we have to continue to do it so that they understand what's at stake here. I don't think most understand how the tsunami of dark money, election spending, where it's not disclosed, right? Where the money, you have no idea where it comes from, impacts the most significant challenges that we face in this country. When you think about it, dark money perpetuates the climate crisis, does it every day. Imperiling Americans at home and causing significant and lasting damage to the environment. I had a meeting just before this I was with the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, NYSERDA we call it in New York, who's trying to do projects with clean energy. And it's hard to imagine. We still have deniers, but the deniers are spending millions and millions of dollars to influence elections so that we don't do the kinds of things that we need to do to save the planet. That's one way. You see it influencing state governments, swaying pivotal elections at the state level. Conservative groups have spent up to $1 billion a year denying science. Think about that, $1 billion a year just denying science and opposing actions on climate change at a critical moment in the future of this planet. And sadly, it doesn't stop there. I think you know this. Starting in the mid-1970s, the anti-abortion movement fought to gain political power by changing campaign finance laws in their favor. Citizens United was the culmination of that effort. In doing so, they captured the United States Supreme Court, paved the way for the Dobbs decision, which reversed Roe versus Wade, and now we see it even in the High Court in South Carolina, ruling just the other day, the Supreme Court, against reproductive rights for women. It's happening everywhere. And there is a direct causal line from Citizens United to the Supreme Court's reversal. Unlimited dark money has been an impediment also, in addition to reproductive rights, in addition to climate crisis, to gun safety laws. I mean, you can't imagine something that more Americans agree on than the need to have thoughtful, reasonable gun safety laws, but we can't get it done. We had a modest change, I guess it was last year before. Chris Murphy did a great job. Others did a great job. But honestly, it was so modest. We made it to be a big victory because it's the first victory we've had in decades. But honestly, compared to what people want and what's appropriate, it's just so little. But here we are. Gun manufacturers and the pro-gun groups have clearly abused broken campaign finance laws, endangering Americans, putting people literally in the crosshairs, including at schools, at places of worship. I mean, think about now parents thinking about when they send their children to school, the thought at the back of their head is, are they going to be safe? We're talking about cell phones and the impact that they have on young children and whether they should have them 24/7. And you know, when you talk about asking kids to surrender their cell phones at the beginning of the school day and picking them up at the end of the school day, you know, the number one thing you hear in response is parents very concerned that if something happens in the school, if there's a shooting, that the child not be able to call somebody. Think about that. From American society, that we have managed to get to a place where we're so concerned because we can't stop the gun lobby from doing the things they do, the harm that they do, and it all comes back to dark money and campaign finance. Obviously, you know all about that. The system allows politicians to reward corporate special interests. And last year we did, again, Sean's leadership and a number of folks, Virginia and Tiffany and others participated in And Democracy series where we linked dark money to all of these issues and why we can't make progress on so many things that need to be addressed by this country. The top issues, and we face so little, we can make so little progress because of it. And that's the harm that's been wrought by Citizens United, a decision which continues even 15 years from now to be staggering, and its impacts are not only being felt, the impacts are growing and growing and growing because we have no meaningful oversight by the Federal Elections Commission. For instance, and I'm preaching to the choir and people who know better than I do, but the naive notion that the Supreme Court held that in Citizens United, much of the spending would be uncoordinated, because the coordinated money, if you coordinated, you'd be running up against the disclosure laws. And they assumed, again, naively, that organizations seeking to influence our politics would register with and report their spending to the FEC, and the prohibition against foreign interference would be enforced by the FEC. But as the report demonstrates, which we're all going to read, I'm sure, by the end of the day, or certainly by the end of the weekend, that it has actually opened the door for super PACs, dark money, unlimited contributions, and the FEC has refused time and time and time again to act. For example, since Citizens United, the nonpartisan career professional staff has recommended action in 59 matters alleging unlawful coordination between campaigns and super PACs. The commissioners took action in 7 of those 59 cases. 59 cases, and it's 52-7 against the professional staff. During the same period, in dark money matters, the FEC acted on only 5 of nonpartisan career against the professional staff's recommendations, 24 recommendations. So, on foreign interference, the FEC has acted in barely half of the nonpartisan career staff's recommendations. What's most troubling is the FEC's apparent partisan enforcement of matters related to President Trump. According to the data provided by the FEC, President Trump was 32-0 in matters before the FEC, meaning the commissioners voted in all cases to vote with the president to uphold, by virtue of not pursuing the investigations or rendering a decision that's contrary to his. They have failed to uphold the law, which has real consequences for American people who rely on the agency, who expect that the Federal Election Commission is going to do everything it can to make certain our elections are fair. And the hits keep coming. On April 30th, as I think most of you know, the FEC lost its quorum. Why? Because the president fired Ellen and a Republican commissioner resigned. So the result, no quorum. And the law requires a quorum for the FEC to do its work. So as I stand here right before you, as we sit in this room and talk about it, the FEC cannot launch investigations. They cannot issue advisory opinions. They cannot issue rules. They will not, they cannot hold Donald Trump accountable, and there is absolutely no cop on the beat. So where does that leave us? We're reminded of the words of former Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis, who said so many really wise things. One of those things is we must make a choice. We have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. You, like most Americans, would choose democracy. I choose democracy. So we know the solutions are needed. We need a constitutional amendment to reverse the awful, awful Citizens United decision, or at least a majority on the Supreme Court that will reverse it and restore integrity to our elections. We need to strengthen disclosure laws to empower voters to make informed choices at the ballot box. We need innovative reforms like small donor financing to empower every single American so they feel they have power at the ballot box, that they feel they have agency in American elections, and that it's not been ceded entirely to powerful special interests. We also need to reform the FEC, to get enough commissioners at the FEC, first of all, to constitute a quorum, to put an actual cop on the beat, and to hold lawbreakers accountable. So Congress can reimagine the FEC, and in this moment, at its 50th birthday, to make it a proactive, forward-looking body, the one that was envisioned in 1975, a body that is willing to embrace change, is willing to take bold action in the face of these new challenges. And as people get particularly clever about how to put more and more money in, to make sure they're following that, making sure they're doing everything to uphold it. All of those things and so much more embodied in the Freedom to Vote Act, which and I thank all the people here who have done so much to continue to advance it. We are going to pass it. It's going to take a little while. It's going to take a fight, but we're going to get this done. And I think ultimately reflecting on the FEC's past, it's clear that so much work remains, that the health of the democracy and a working FEC for the next 50 years are vital to it. And the work is urgent. And we need each of you to spotlight the urgency, to tell the story, to talk about it, to share the report, or at least its executive summary, that all these people did such great work on, to tell the story about it. So people, if you don't tell people, they're left to rely on what they see on social media, or what, pieces of information now constitute news. So we have to do it, and we have to continue to work together, because the only way we're going to be successful in stopping this corruption, holding people accountable, making sure leaders respond to the needs of the many, not the needs of the few, is for us to change and for us to be successful. And we can't do that unless we're all doing it together. So again, thank you to to Virginia for the amazing work Common Cause does each and every day. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend time with you. Thanks for all the great work that you do, and God bless you. Thanks. And since you have the report, I'm taking that.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Omar Nuruldin, and I'm with Common Cause. I lead our policy and litigation work, both at the federal, national, and state level. And I'm joined here on stage by Tiffany Muller from End Citizens United, Dan Weiner from the Brennan Center, and on Zoom, we have Commissioner Ellen Weintraub and Susan Lerner of Common Cause New York. And so I'm not going to give any kind of remarks at the top, but I did just want to give you a quick roadmap of what we're doing. What I learned from teaching constitutional law is like, folks, a captive audience wants to know, like, what's the plan? So the plan is I'm going to ask our panelists here, who are deep experts both in how the FEC works, in campaign finance laws more generally, to give us a little bit of a retrospective and, kind of future looking, like, what does this mean? We're going to start out a little bit more on the wonkier side of how the FEC works, how campaign finance law works, and then at the end, kind of broaden that scope a little bit and talk more about, like, what does this all mean for our democracy? And so to start, and I'm not going to give bios of the panelists, but as I ask you those questions, feel free to kind of weave in your past roles and past work and how that informs your answer. So to start, I'm going to start, and I know the commissioner is behind me, but I'm going to start with Commissioner Weintraub. You served for more than 20 years at the FEC. And so I was hoping you could share with us today what changes you have observed at the commission since you began in 2002, how it operated back then, how it's operated in the last few years, and how that has informed, the kind of reforms you would recommend be made at the FEC going forward.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here virtually. I hope you can all hear me. And thank you to the technologists who made this possible, because I wouldn't have wanted to miss this opportunity to be part of this important event. Thank you to Common Cause for convening it, and it is an honor to be on the panel with these great and fierce advocates. And of course, my gratitude to Congressman Morelli for his outstanding leadership in this field. The FEC has gone from dysfunctional to non-functional with the loss of the quorum. This was completely predictable. Indeed, I predicted it. The last time we lost the quorum was in 2019 to 2020 during the last Trump administration. We've lost the quorum a total of 4 times now at the FEC. And 2 of them were sort of back-to-back in 2019 to 2020. From September 2019 through December 2020, the agency was without a quorum for all but about a month in an election year that shattered all previous fundraising records. The FEC was, as has been stated, established in the wake of Watergate to allow Americans to follow the money, to provide for an informed electorate, to cast sunlight on potential conflicts of interest. Really important topic. Watergate was a scandal involving about $1 million, which used to be considered a lot of money in the campaign finance world. But as Congressman Morelli pointed out, in 2024, there were 6 donors who each gave more than 100 times that amount. The Supreme Court has unfortunately been undermining campaign finance laws, frankly, since the Buckley decision. CU tends to get a lot of attention, but really the jurisprudence goes back to Buckley with the slight hopeful exception of the McConnell decision, which upheld most of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. Most of the decisions out of the Supreme Court have been bad. In Citizens United, the court held that ingratiation and access are not corruption and will not cause Americans to lose faith in our democracy. Perhaps the only surprise is that it took 15 years from Citizens United to get us to this place where the richest man in the world donated almost $300 million and was allowed to take a chainsaw to the very agencies that were investigating his own businesses, and to pave the way for even greater government largesse to be showered upon those same businesses. This is no time to allow the lights at the FEC to go dark. Now, the staff, the excellent staff, will of course keep the databases up and running, but in the absence of a quorum, those who would disregard the law will be emboldened, and those seeking to comply will not have any way to get definitive guidance. But perhaps even worse than an FEC that is dysfunctional or non-functional is one that actively undermines the law. In recent years, the FEC has issued opinions that allowed joint fundraising between candidate committees and super PACs, and allowed candidates to directly coordinate their get-out-the-vote efforts with supportive super PACs. Decisions like this eviscerate the contribution limits that the Supreme Court has upheld as necessary, quote, to deal with the reality or appearance of corruption inherent in a system permitting unlimited financial contributions, end quote. And don't get me started on the long list of complaints against a variety of political actors, but most notably the president. 64 complaints and counting, 32 where the staff recommended proceeding, and 0 actual investigations so far. And this was despite the well-founded recommendations of the Commission's excellent and nonpartisan professional staff. So while I know there is a lot going on, I encourage all the watchdogs in this room to stay on high alert on issues relating to money and politics and the FEC. I know I will.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to turn to Dan next. Dan, as a former FEC staffer, what changes did you notice over time among staff? And in your, wearing your current hat from the Brennan Center, what reforms would you recommend, or has Brennan recommended?
Well, thank you so much. Making sure the microphone works. Thank you so much. I want to just first express my appreciation to you and Virginia, Aaron Sherb, and everyone who put this event on, to NEA for hosting. Also want to just express extraordinary appreciation to Congressman Morelli for his outstanding leadership on these issues. One of my favorite memories is watching him dig in to the details at an oversight hearing on the FEC. And I had truly never heard a member of Congress with such command of the details of the FEC's work. So it really was amazing. The staff report that is being released today, I think, huge congratulations to Sean and the rest of the team. I think it's going to make a huge contribution to the field. One of the core messages of that report, right, is that while the Supreme Court and Citizens United did a lot of damage, the other branches of government have their share of accountability for this. Citizens United said that spending would be transparent. It said that super PACs would be independent. These were the core to its reasoning. And then what happened, of course, is that the spending that actually happened was not independent. And it is partly thanks to the FEC that presidential campaigns can now outsource large aspects of their operations to outside groups, which happened in the 2024 campaign. And of course, we've had torrents and torrents of secret dark money, about $2 billion that we know of in this last election cycle, according to a report we released this month. The staff, and I was not part of the career staff. I worked for Commissioner Weintraub as a political staffer, but I think that the FEC staff have continued to be faithful to the agency's mission by and large, and have worked very hard to vindicate that. But the FEC is designed in such a way that there's very limited amounts that they can do if you have at least half the commission that is philosophically, opposed to enforcement of the law. And so that really, the FEC is really a crux of an issue. Now, I also think that despite the valiant efforts of Congressman Morelli, his staff, other members of Congress, though, we can't let Congress off the hook. Congress has had many opportunities to close some of the loopholes that Citizens United created to strengthen the FEC, and it hasn't been able to do so. So this is a huge pressing problem. And we at the Brennan Center, who focus on Citizens United, rightly so, I think it's also incumbent on us to remind the public and everyone that other branches of government have their role. I'll just say one other thing, which is, of course, right now, not only does the FEC not have a quorum, which is, I agree with Commissioner Weintraub, a huge issue, particularly around transparency, because there's no way to hold unscrupulous actors who don't file their reports accountable. We now have the challenge of an assault on the FEC's independence, both the firing of Commissioner Weintraub, the president's executive order purporting to assert control over independent agencies, including the FEC and the EAC, obviously, and we're suing over this, attempts to weaponize the EAC. I actually have advocated for some increased presidential control over the Federal Election Commission, for instance, letting the president appoint the chair of the agency. And I don't think that's inherently a bad thing, but I think no one in this room, and none of us who work in this space have ever advocated for the FEC not to be robustly independent and even-handed. And so while a dysfunctional agency is frustrating, an agency that doesn't enforce the law is deeply problematic, I also worry very much right now about a weaponized FEC, which will also put huge pressure on the staff there. And I think it's really incumbent on all of us at this time to stand up for robust, even-handed enforcement of the law, and then, as Congressman Morelli alluded to work for an ambitious agenda, really to restore ownership of government back to the American people. And this has been Common Cause's mission throughout your existence. It's one we at the Brennan Center share with also Tiffany's organization, and we're looking forward to working with you all on this in the coming years.
Thank you, Dan. We've talked so far about a lot of dysfunction, or as the commissioner said, non-function. So I want to turn to Susan from Common Cause New York to talk a little bit about the New York City Campaign Finance Board, which is often considered a model for enforcement of campaign finance laws and has been fairly effective at combating corruption and secret money in politics. So Susan, what can the FEC learn from the Campaign Finance Board in New York? And for example, how has the board's structure contributed to its success?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for letting me zoom in. I'm very appreciative, along with Commissioner Weintraub, not to have to skip the panel because of scheduling and other challenges. And so thank you for letting me zoom in. And I was able to participate this morning in a press conference with members of New York City government, talking about a situation that we have in our mayoral campaign, which the Campaign Finance Board has been able to address. Now, our position at Common Cause New York is that they've taken a first step and should go further. But I think there's a real contrast to how the New York City campaign finance law has managed to evolve, how the Campaign Finance Board has made constant recommendations for strengthening and improving New York City's public financing system. Far from perfect, and the Citizens United decision has given us some major challenges. But unlike the situation which today's report, which I'm looking forward to read, points out at the federal level, in New York City, we've strengthened rather than weakened regulation of campaign finance, both for those who participate in the public matching fund system and those who do not. And that is in major part, I believe, because of the strength of the Campaign Finance Board. It is well regarded. It makes recommendations to the City Council, and lo and behold, the City Council actually passes some of those recommendations. So, some of this, quite frankly, is cultural. The Campaign Finance Board was set up in the late 1980s as a result of a charter revision that came out of a really significant city scandal that involved bribery and influence peddling, and took down really a significant number of city officials. But it was set up to be an independent agency. And unlike the FEC, and quite frankly, unlike election administration in New York State, the thing that I believe is really singular about the Campaign Finance Board is that it is a nonpartisan body. It has an odd number of appointees, and the appointees come in with the charge to be truly independent. And our experience over the more than 40 years of the Campaign Finance Board in New York is that both the appointing authority, which is basically the mayor, and the appointees take that independence charge very, very seriously. But the CFB in New York City is not the only model. I also, when I was doing democracy work in California, worked with the Fair Practices Commission, also appointed by the executive, but also an odd number, and also appointed with the idea that the appointees would not then take direction from the appointing authorities, but that they would be independent arbiters in the public interest. So I do think we have models at the state level that shows that there is a different way to go forward with campaign finance regulation, and it does have an impact. As I said, we are struggling in New York with the ascendancy, only most recently, of large super PACs. But we are able, for instance, in our campaign regulations, to deal with the problem of red boxing, which is a coordinated signaling through websites or public statements that a candidate makes to its supporting PAC to say, hey, I don't want to spend my money in this very specific way, targeting these voters in these places with this message, but hey, I'll put it on my website, and won't it be wonderful if somebody just picks up my suggestions and follows through? So within the last week, we have had reports of 2 different campaigns in New York City. One, a high-profile mayoral candidate, and the other, a citywide comptroller campaign, which actually indulged in red boxing. And the mayor's campaign, the mayoral campaign of Andrew Cuomo, was denied $622,000 of public matching funds because the Campaign Finance Board recognized that red boxing, that public signaling of coordination between the candidate and the allegedly independent PAC had taken place. And this is a good first step forward, but it shows that it is possible to set up a model which will hold even the most powerful and most prominent candidates and elected officials accountable. The investigations into the corruption allegations regarding current Mayor Adams started in the Campaign Finance Board. And what we see over and over again is candidates attempting unsuccessfully, because they keep getting caught, to go around the clear requirements of New York City's campaign finance law. It shows it works. It shows the enforcement works. It shows that there is a model that we would like to see followed at the federal level, which protects the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Tiffany, I'm going to turn to you now. End Citizens United doesn't try to hide what its what its goal is. And I know you all have filed several complaints with the FEC against candidates and members of Congress for allegedly violating campaign finance laws. Now that there isn't a quorum, one very practical matter is what happens to those complaints that you all have filed? What are other avenues to kind of vindicate the trust of Americans who want to know where and how money is influencing our politics? And then the second part to that is just a larger question of what does all this mean for the kind of trust that folks have in our electoral and campaign finance systems?
Well, first, let me start where everyone else started, which is thank you for having me. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here with all of my incredible allies and partners in this work. Dan, Commissioner Weintraub, Susan, Omar, Virginia, and Aaron, and all the team at Common Cause. Thank you so much for putting this on. And of course, To Representative Morelli, we are just thank you for being such the spear in this fight on Capitol Hill day in and day out. So I'm Tiffany Muller. I'm the president of In Citizens United, and our job is to get big money out of politics. And sometimes that feels like a lot of job security right now, I have to say. But we actually, our goal is to restore the faith and trust that the American people have in our system and to let them feel like they do have a voice and they do have power. And so we're a grassroots organization made up of 4 million members across the country who are retired teachers or firefighters or retired teachers is actually our number one occupation on our FEC reports, as a matter of fact. But they are all united in the belief that it is the people who can actually create change in this country and not just the big money. And so, but at the heart of the mission that we fight for every day is a functioning Federal Elections Commission. Because I think your last question is one of the most important, which is what is a dysfunctional or non-functional Federal Elections Commission doing to people across the country? And I think we see the fact that at no point in our history has the opinion and trust in Congress been lower than it is right now. As a matter of fact, I think it's somewhere around 80 to 85% of Americans think that Congress is just watching out for the biggest and richest among us and not fighting for everyday people. And why wouldn't they feel that way? I mean, look at what is happening every single day. And the Federal Elections Commission exists so that Americans can know who is trying to influence our elected officials, who is trying to influence and buy access. And in this post-Citizens United world where we're seeing $20 billion spent in an election cycle, that mission is more important than ever. But as we all have been talking about, far too often the FEC has been unable or unwilling, of course with Commissioner Weintraub, definitely not part of this, to fulfill that responsibility. For years, we have seen the gridlock and deliberate sabotage leave the agency really toothless, sometimes even complicit in allowing that corruption to flourish. And the Republican commissioners, you heard the stats. When you have things like independent investigators recommending action in 32 cases against President Trump, and Republican commissioners voting 32 times to deny even moving forward with an investigation, they are far more concerned with being partisan loyalists than they are with being watchdogs for the American people. And the result has been exactly what we've seen. It's nothing short of a disaster for our democracy. When you have the richest person in the world spending $300 million to then buy a position that is with unprecedented access and power, and then using that unprecedented access and power to destroy the very agencies and the very watchdogs that are on the beat. So we are seeing this play out time and time again. I have so much more. I think we can all just go on and on about the problems that we are seeing. But one of the things that you said was that we file a number of complaints against folks who we believe have violated the law. And you're right, we do. We are proud of our role as a watchdog and as trying to call out the times when we see candidates breaking the rules. But without a quorum, we know that the FEC won't be able to move forward on those cases. And, you know, last election cycle, we filed 48 complaints with the FEC, DOJ, IRS, and ethics committees. But even when the FEC had a quorum, far too often what we saw was it moving at such a kind of glacial pace. And even when the independent investigators recommended action be taken, too often that partisan gridlock coming to block it, that people feel like they can do whatever they want and take whatever money they want and violate the law with no consequence likely to happen. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two. Because I like to talk about the second one. But the first is that in 2022, a little-known candidate named Carolyn Levitt, maybe you've now heard of her, was running against Chris Pappas in the New Hampshire congressional race. And she took about, I think it was $200,000 of money from people that was over the limit. She just kept taking their money. And we said that she had accepted illegal and excessive donations. The FEC followed up. And earlier this year, she actually had to amend her reports. And basically what it showed is exactly what we thought. Yes, she had violated the law. However, it took 4 years for that to happen, and now she is press secretary at the White House, and there has still been no consequence for taking hundreds of thousands of dollars of illegal and excessive contributions. Instead, she was just rewarded with the largest podium and in the country. And let's talk about another one. In 2018, Rick Scott decided he was going to run for the U.S. Senate. But prior to running for the U.S. Senate, he actually was chair of a super PAC. And lo and behold, on the day that he announced that he was running for the U.S. Senate, that super PAC just happened to, uncoordinated, I'm sure, start spending millions and millions of dollars on TV on his behalf. The FEC's independent counsel said, yes, there was reason to believe that he violated the law and that they recommended moving forward with an investigation. However, once again, the partisan gridlock kicked in and no action was taken. We have been fighting this case ever since. And as a matter of fact, we sued the FEC for dismissal of that complaint. And in February, the DC Circuit Court heard the case en banc. Y'all are geekier than me even when it comes to this, so I know you all know what a big deal this is. And we are now waiting for a ruling in that case. And the reason I bring this up is because it actually could provide a path forward as we sit with no quorum, as we sit with an FEC that continues to be gridlocked and non-functional. We are trying to figure out any pathway forward to be able to actually move forward on some of these cases and to have the ability of a judicial avenue to be able to take action in these cases. Right now, what we're seeing is, a Republican commissioner who bragged about deregulating campaign finance laws. We saw the creation of joint fundraising accounts in 2024 that meant that even in committees where only 1% of the money was actually raised by the candidate, that they were able to spend all the money in a coordinated way and get lowest unit rate through TV ads, which is a huge deal in campaigns. So you see just this constant chipping away at the laws that are on the books to actually protect from this kind of corruption. I am proud to be in this fight with all of you. We are all going to continue to fight it, but at no point have we seen a more non-functional and dysfunctional FEC than we do right now. And at no point has the mission of the FEC been more important than it is right now.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you for sharing, that win, because in this work, it's sometimes hard to define what a win looks like. And so...
Well, we're keeping those fingers crossed for that win.
Yeah. And so there's been a couple of kind of threads that have emerged from kind of our panelists' talk. One of them is like some of the issues around the FEC didn't start this year, didn't start 5 years ago. They're kind of maybe some longer systemic problems. And so I'm going to open this up to all the panelists, but I will start with Commissioner Weintraub. If you had like a magic wand and you were able to say, here are a set of reforms that we could do to kind of make the FEC not just non-functional, change that, but make it actually functional, like what would some of those be? We heard from Susan about some of the ways in which the Campaign Finance Board is different, nonpartisan commissioners, odd number of commissioners, sometimes some of those like little tweaks seem superficial on their face, but they can have more substantive impacts. So I wanted it to turn to Commissioner Weintraub first on this, and then others who have some, desire to hold the magic wand, let me know, and we'll go to you next.
Thank you. And I agree with pretty much everything that everybody has been saying so far. I think the key issue is that the commission is not going to be better than the commissioners. Who gets appointed, assuming anybody gets appointed, is going to be really key to whether the commission can do its job, because it could do its job exactly the way it is if the right commissioners were on board. And one of the problems with a prolonged period of lack of quorum is that it gives an easy out, an easy excuse to new commissioners once they get appointed to continue to duck investigations, because then they say, oh, we have such a backlog because we were out of business for so long, so we just don't have the resources to investigate pretty much anything. And I've seen this line before, and I guarantee you it will be used again. The commission actually worked very hard to reduce the backlog over the last few years and did great work on that. So it's really kind of sad to know that is going to pile up again. One of my favorite recommendations, though, that is part of HR 1, the massive reform bill that unfortunately didn't pass, would allow for the staff to conduct investigations unless they are stopped by a vote of 4 commissioners. Right now, the staff makes a recommendation, and it takes 4 votes to adopt that recommendation to even begin an investigation. And if the staff could conduct those investigations and then present the commission, even as currently constituted, or, as constituted with an actual group of commissioners on board, with actual evidence and information, I think it would make it a lot harder for commissioners to shoot down complaints once they actually have the facts in front of them. What has happened over the years is that mostly Republican commissioners, I hate to be partisan, but that is the reality, have elevated the reason to believe standard that it takes to launch an investigation to a point where basically somebody like Tiffany wants to file a complaint, has to have already done her own investigation and presented it all with a bow wrapped around it to the commission before they'll say they have enough to find reason to believe. So if we could empower the staff to actually conduct an investigation and then submit that information to the commission, I think that would be a big improvement to the way things have been operating. And at least the public would be informed of the results of that investigation.
Again.
All right, Dan.
So it's a really, really interesting question. And I think it's important to zoom out a little bit here. I agree completely with what Ellen said. So the reality of the FEC's challenge, right, is that to some extent it's an agency from a different time when the 2 major parties didn't disagree so much on first principles. They disagreed maybe, and so the model was to prevent the FEC from being weaponized. You have it be evenly divided so that either party, if they're going to do an investigation, it's not going to be weaponized. But there were elements of both parties that agreed that, this is, first of all, it's a law passed by Congress, so we have to enforce it. And also this is an important goal. So you've got those norms, right, that have sort of fallen apart, right, of the FEC be having a responsibility to vindicate the laws as passed by Congress. Novel thought there. And then you have now the newer also then erosion of this idea that also government shouldn't be weaponized for partisan advantages. And so now we also have to deal with the threat of potentially an FEC that was fully constituted being used as a partisan weapon if the president, say, fires all the commissioners and replaces them with people who are partisans, not committed to even-handed enforcement. So I think Ellen is right that one really important answer to that is to use the nonpartisan staff there as a backstop and to put them more in the driver's seat of enforcement, at least initially, with political oversight, because I do think political oversight is important. That is how most independent agencies work in the until recently, pretty well. Now, I'm not gonna lie to the folks in the room. I get very worried when I see the chair, for instance, of the FCC pursuing what appears to be vendettas against the media in a public forum, and that creates a new wrinkle. I tend to think that the even divide poses real problems. I remain in favor of an odd-numbered commission. What we have recommended and what is echoed in a lot of other recommendations is that, of course, that fifth commissioner be an independent and that there be actual safeguards in the law to ensure that they can't be sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Because I do think the independence of the agency is important. I think safeguards against weaponization are important. Ultimately, though, all of this is about how do you reconstitute democratic institutions in an era when a lot of the norms that they were presupposed don't exist anymore. And I think it's a really big challenge. I think it's going to be one of the big challenges we all think about, what should an effective FEC look like? In the meantime, though, at the very least, I think empowering the staff and creating a more streamlined enforcement process is absolutely critical.
Tiffany, did you want the magic wand?
I always want the magic wand, but my colleagues here have said all of the most amazing things that I was going to. I think if we are going to empower the staff and do investigations before they're presented to the commissioners, which would be very helpful. I think we also have to make sure that they have the resources and the staff to do that. And we have to get more money through Congress and appropriations in order to be able to support them doing that. And I'm sure there'll be no holdups for that, right? At all. But absolutely, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to also make sure that we were funding the staff and the right amount of staff to be able to actually do the investigations and do proactive investigations, as Ellen said, not just ones that folks like ourselves wrap up in a bow and hand to them, but are actually like combing through and finding violations on their own so that it is a deterrent factor. I agree with the odd commissioners and support that. But yeah, really, we're talking about how do we fix it? And right now, not to be partisan, but right now the other party is talking about how to just end it because they think that more money in the system helps them win elections and helps them keep power. And so I also think we have to figure out how do we change those incentives? And part of that is making sure that they understand that the American people care about these issues. They care about things like corruption and that they're going to take it seriously.
And Susan, I want to turn to you with a slight variation on the question. So your magic wand not only allows you to fix potentially the FEC, but also to empower states and municipalities on passing their own types of campaign finance laws. I think something that Citizens United has done has kind of dampen the collective imagination of like what else is possible. It's like, oh, this thing happened in Supreme Court, like that's it, we can't do anything. But I think as you pointed out, there's been some good progress in New York City. California has had some progress on disclosure laws, and there's been some research that shows like folks actually pay attention to disclosure, and that may influence the way people vote. So your magic wand is a little bit more powerful. What would you do with it?
So we have extensive disclosure requirements in the campaign finance law in New York City. It is harder to spend dark money in New York City. Not impossible, but harder. So for instance, we know that DoorDash, which has a dispute with New York City, just gave the PAC that supports Andrew Cuomo $1 million because of the requirements that we have in the New York City law for full disclosure, not just of campaign donations directly to the candidate, but to the PACs. Because you can receive unlimited money doesn't mean you can hide it if the lawmakers are willing to take that on. And so we have a top 3 disclosure in New York City. Any fund, any campaign committee, whether it's independent or candidate supported or supports a ballot measure, has to, on all of its advertising, identify the top 3 donors to that committee. So that means if the primary backer of a particular measure in front of the voters happens to be a labor union, then that labor union is identified on the ad. If it's the Real Estate Board of New York, that entity is identified on the ad. There are things that we can do to provide voters with more information. And as we see from the kind of attention and coverage which these extraordinarily large donations are getting in New York City, the government, if the government provides the information, the public will pay attention. So there are still things that can be done, even in a deeply corrupted post-Citizens United world, that pushes back on the corruption of the system. But legislators at the municipal or state or federal level have to be willing to hold themselves to the same standard, because that's always the challenge with passing laws and regulations, is that the people who have to approve it are the people who are then going to have to follow the law. I would point out that we have also been successful in New York State in adding in a statewide public financing system. So there is still a desire on the part of lawmakers and on the part of the public to grapple with the limitations of our current campaign finance system, so that it is possible to refocus campaigns and candidates on the voters, the small dollar contributors, even in this heavily legally corrupted situation.
Thank you, Susan. All right, what I'm going to do now is come to you all for questions. I think what I'm going to do is take, Dan, if you would mind passing me one of those mics over there. And if you just raise your hand, I'm going to play the role of question taker as well. So I'm going to come off stage and let you ask your question to either one of the panelists, or if it's a broader question to everyone, that's fine too. Is this working? All right. Here we are, doing a little bit of everything.
Hi, Nancy Morgan. I'm coordinator of Big Money Out, a group in Virginia working on campaign finance, and we're affiliated with American Promise, which is pushing the 4-Hour Freedom Amendment. My question is a state-level advocate, and I really appreciate Susan. We can't look at Washington for anything now. So we're looking in Virginia, we're looking at passing legislation, say, for example, on dark money, disclosure of IE advertising. We did get 3 bills introduced in our General Assembly over the last 3 years. The ACLU came out at the last time to testify again. My question is for you as advocates, what's happening on the nationally in litigation on these issues? I know Prop 2211 in Arizona, it's being reviewed by their Supreme Court, where the argument is that basically money is speech, but speech has a constitutional right to anonymity. So the question is, what is the national litigation, the status of it? I know in Maine they're doing they're reviewing the super PACs and contributions. Is there any hope in terms of the litigation, or is it all the dark side?
It's a great question. And I'm so glad, actually, Susan lifted up the New York State system, which we worked with Common Cause to pass. And I do think is, in many respects, the wave of the future, not only because it encourages small donations, but it also pushes elected officials to raise money in their districts, right? So it's this great way that you can sort of increase constituent engagement while also raising money. But to answer your question, Nancy, I actually continue to be optimistic that there are real meaningful reforms on the table. I think public financing stands on still pretty firm constitutional ground. And I think what you have seen on transparency and on other sort of restrictions, say on super PACs working with candidates, is that the courts have been a little cautious about trying to read the tea leaves of the U.S. Supreme Court. It is inherently troubling, right, that of course we do have a supermajority on the Supreme Court that seems ideologically committed, very committed to this kind of deregulatory approach. But I think that the biggest mistake would be to sort of preemptively just stop trying pass reforms at the state level. Stop trying to innovate at the state level, because then you're just sort of conceding to them that they've already won, right? And trying to do the work for them. I think the court, and this, we work on this a ton at the Brennan Center. We have a big project on Supreme Court reform. I think that the dynamic between the court and the public, and the court and other institutions of government, is always changing. And I think we're in maybe even a period of a little bit of flux right now. One thing that present company accepted, because the people from the House here who, are warriors for this, but one thing that is frustrating, right, is after Citizens United, there was no dialogue with Congress. What has happened with other controversial Supreme Court rulings is the other branches of government move in and they engage in a back and forth. Okay, fine, you said transparency is important. We're going to pass comprehensive disclosure. That has not happened with Congress, so it isn't the same where the court has competition from other institutions. And I think that's what's really so powerful about this paper and the work that Congressman Morelli and his staff are doing, is pushing Congress, right, and then indirectly also the states, to engage in a conversation with the court, because the court should not have the last word on these issues.
Susan, did you have anything to add to that? No? Anyone else on this question? All right, another question? All right.
Hey, I'm Teddy Schleifer. I'm a reporter at the New York Times who writes about campaign finance. One of the things that I've found most alarming as a reporter who writes about transparency in campaign finance is sort of the rise of gray money. In particularly, I feel like in my coverage, I've seen this a lot more on the left over the last, since maybe 2018, 2020, where, it feels like reading super PAC disclosure reports is meaningless because the biggest donors are the allied C4s. And, obviously those are their own black boxes. I feel like when I talk with Democrats privately, the rhetoric they use around that is the same rhetoric they use around engagement in super PAC process in general, unilateral disarmament, everyone's doing it. I guess I wonder if legally, if you guys see any possible momentum around making that less possible. I know that there are some legal guidelines around how you can't donate to C4s explicitly as a way to donate to a super PAC as a pass-through entity, but I feel like the problem, so to speak, is getting worse, and I wonder if there's any possible way to kind of address that issue. Not that I have a position myself, but I just would like to, frankly, I would like to see more information become public about major donors, and I sort of foresee this problem, or I foresee that me not having success with that in the future, because liberals are sort of disguising more and more of their contributions through their C4 groups.
Well,
And I'm just going to do one more question so we can answer both of those in the interest of time. So you had your hand up, and then we'll go and answer both of these at the same time.
I'm Meredith McGehee. I'm not affiliated with anybody, and it's great. As you guys know, and up there on the panel, I worked on these issues for many, many years. And one of my best quotes that I use 5,000 times with the press and people like you are, the FEC was the most successful agency in Washington because it did exactly what Congress designed it to do, which was nothing, right? Mr. Hayes and the House Administration Committee designed it, so it was pretty toothless. And I think Ellen and I have had a disagreement for many years about whether or not you just get the right people. I think time has shown that, that really wasn't the answer here. And we went through many different iterations from odd numbers, et cetera. But the question I have I'd really like to hear you guys talk about is we know that the Republicans for a number of years now, as a party led by McConnell, have opposed all these efforts to either strengthen the FEC, to strengthen transparency, et cetera. And after Citizens United, there was no, huge uprising of citizens demanding that Republicans change their position. So all the solutions that get talked about are totally dependent at the moment on Democratic votes. Just like S1, when everybody said, we're going to have a trifecta, little did they know the trifecta was going to go the other way. So, what is your thinking now, rather than saying we could have all these nice theoretical solutions, to have a situation where the Republican Party pays some price for being wrong on this issue? Because it seems to me so far they have paid no price and, in fact, been rewarded.
Tiffany is the price imposer, so I'm going to.
Well, it feels like everything that we do at In Citizens United is all about making Republicans pay a price for being on the wrong side of these issues. And I think that we are entering into an election cycle that is going to be very similar to what we saw in 2018, right? Or in 2006. When honestly, what we saw were voters across the country making their opinions on these issues known at the ballot box and flipping seats with it. And we were talking earlier about incentives, and I tend to think that the only way that we're going to get back to a place where we change Republican incentives around these issues is to make them pay an electoral price and to see that there is an electoral price at the ballot box for it. What's my plan? My plan is to go win some races, right? And to have this be a part of it, just like we did in 2018, just like we saw in 2006. And what we saw after those two cycles is that in 06, when ethics reform was a big part of the 6 for 06 agenda, then we passed Office of Congressional Ethics. We passed earmark reform. We passed other ethics bills. In 2018, that wave of reformers did lead to the creation of H.R. 1 and For the People Act and the centering of these issues for the next 4 years and being a cinema in a mansion close to getting it passed. So I think that that is a similar moment to what we are in right now. And I will let other people also answer. But then to take on the gray money, I could not agree more that this is a huge problem. And I think normally I get to wear the partisan hat, but in this case, I will actually say this is just a big problem. And prior to Citizens United, as I'm sure you know, about 75% of the money spent in our elections was able to be completely traced back to its original source. And now only about 25% of the money being spent in our elections is able to be traced back to its original source. And part of that is exactly what you said. It's the shell game that is happening. It's the pop-up super PACs that are then being funneled through C4s and other places where then that identity is hidden. I think a couple of things. One, we have seen, obviously, the Disclose Act, some regulations around super PACs and that kind of funneling and cracking down on that funneling that would get to some of that transparency and accountability. And we're going to continue to push for those. I also think that, there is the small dollar donor side of this continues to be incredibly transparent and disclosed. So it is really this kind of like darker money around the C4s and super PACs that we need to work on.
So I'd like to, Ellen, you should, Commissioner Weintraub.
That's fine. Happy to do it in either order. I just wanted to address this gray money issue because I think there are legal tools to deal with this. Again, with apologies to Meredith McGehee, I'm going to go back to we need commissioners who are willing to enforce the law. There have been any number of cases before the FEC that involved the law on contributions in the name of another. And that should provide a vehicle for the commission to investigate, to trace the money back, particularly because a number of these C4s, it's not a big secret that they're being set up specifically to shield the identity of donors who are, then they're then going to take the, pretty much the entire pot of that C4 and dump it into a super PAC with no real transparency. And I think it is possible to use the law against contributions against in the name of another to go after those. I have voted to do that when I was on the commission, but it was a very hard slog getting 4 votes to do that. It's all about who's enforcing the law.
But it's also about the requirements of the law, because you can require more disclosures of C4s. Just because you don't have to do that for tax purposes doesn't mean that you can't require it. And I would suggest to the New York Times reporter that while it's not my favorite part of our lobbying law in New York State, and I am not suggesting New York City or New York State always has the solution, take a look at the source of funding requirements for C4 organizations who lobby in New York State. It's onerous. I'm not sure it's meaningful disclosure, but if you want to know who supports C4s who are registered lobbyists in New York State, that information has to be disclosed. And again, in New York City, there are provisions which allow the Campaign Finance Board to dive beyond just the top level and to get to the actual donor so that the ads have to reflect where the money comes from. You could have 2 or 3 intermediate C4s, but if your money's coming from the real estate board or your money's coming from the teachers, that's who's got to be listed on the ad. So there are tools if a legislature is willing to wield them.
All right, part of my performance evaluation is keeping us on time. And so with that, I'm going to introduce the chair of our National Governing Board at Common Cause, Martha Tooney.
Thanks, Omar. And it's my pleasure to be here today. I want to thank all of our panelists, Dan, Tiffany, Commissioner Weintraub, Susan, and of course, Omar for moderating. Thanks for your insights and your participation in this important discussion about our campaign finance system and the agency presumably charged with enforcing those campaign finance laws. The influence of big money has always been a problem here, not only in Washington, but also across our country. And in the past 15 years, that has been exacerbated by the problem rulings like Citizens United and McCutcheon. Big political donors are getting what they want from elected officials. Nothing could be more clear than what we are seeing happening right now with just what we've talked about today with Mr. Musk and others getting exactly what they want. And many other services Americans depend on are getting shortchanged. So today's panel leaves us with much to think about as we work to fix our broken campaign finance laws and the agency charged with enforcing them. On behalf of Common Cause, I look forward to working together with all of you and building this movement as the fight continues to rein in the outsized influence of big money in politics. Thanks so much for joining us.